Welcome to the next episode of Hollywood Breaks. It's good to be with you on this Friday morning. How's things in Maine right now?
Things in Maine are nice, Tim. Good to be with you yet again.
What's the weather like in Maine? Why do I always picture the weather to be cooler? I don't know. I guess I'm a traveler.
Yes, it is decidedly cooler up here than it is in where I'm originally living, Philadelphia, which is a sweatbox at the moment.
Oh yeah.
So it's cooler up here. We have the advantage of being close to the water, so we get the nice breeze, which definitely drops the temperature. Whereas if you drive like maybe half a mile inland, the temperature goes up like 5 degrees and it's just hot. But it's definitely cooler here than it is, throughout most of the East Coast.
Now, is it a requirement in Maine to do sailing lessons? Like, do you have to have a sailing license in order to actually be there?
Well, I actually married into a family of very hardcore sailors. So I'm more or less getting my lesson just being a part of this family. Because I obviously, growing up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, landlocked, sailing was not in my extracurricular activity
right
handbook. And Maine to me was like Canada.
That's like
I only discovered it because of my wife. So, and it's a beautiful place. So anyone who's interested in visiting, I highly encourage it.
Well, I think my favorite part of you being in Maine is it hasn't slowed down your business at all, because the coronavirus really has reset the rules and reset the game, so you can be anywhere on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's actually just kick off and say welcome to this episode of Hollywood Breaks. It's good to be with you all. We just want to be here to share some of the insights that we capture in the industry as content creators and the work that we do on a weekly basis. I am Tim Thompson. This is Keith Rauch, our media insider, and really the person who is taking us through this journey from originally a media marketer to a content creator. Keith, you are our brain power behind this scene. I'm just the good looks and talent, I guess.
Very kind of you to compliment me so. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, you too. We have a lot to talk about today because I swear, once we started doing this podcast, my eyes have opened up to just all the information that sits there in the media and all the things that are changing. And then my friends are sending me articles, probably you too, posting you on things, the new articles of all the things that are changing in this industry. So they can kind of hear what we're talking about and really reconciling and echoing back the sentiments that we have. So there's a lot to talk about this week. I think the first one I want to kind of hit to is something we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, but it's the end of the Paramount Decree. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is what we've been seeing, anticipating, and here it is.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about it last week, and this past week, the federal judge finally signed off on the Justice Department's reasoning, so it's effectively the end of the Paramount Decree. And for those of you who don't know, it was essentially a decision in the late 40s, which basically, in a nutshell, restricted the studios from owning theaters. Back in the day, the studios actually owned the theaters, so AMCs, those kinds of things didn't really exist. And then that basically effectively ended it. And the Justice Department's justification for changing it was that because distribution has become so commoditized and democratized, with Netflix and YouTube and all these places you can go to see content, there was no reason to restrict it anymore.
That's right.
So now officially the studios can get back into the theater owning game, which is definitely going to be interesting given, we have to see what happens over the course of the next few weeks with Tenet coming out at the end of the month, overseas and domestically over Labor Day weekend, how many theaters are able to survive this. And it's a very interesting time. I've been reading some very divergent views on the subject. Most of them surprisingly lean towards the studios would be crazy to buy theaters, but I don't know.
I'm going to say the studios are the ones that push this thing through. So they're not, and I'm going to guess they know what they're doing more than the people on the outside are speculating what's going on.
And let's not forget that two of the big media companies, Disney and Universal, are very much steeped in the sort of consumer experience. Disney, obviously Disney World, and Universal has Universal Studios and Islands of Adventure in Orlando. So they all know how to really make the customer experience comfortable and memorable. And I think for a lot of theaters, I mean, I mentioned this briefly last week, but if you're expecting consumers to just head back to the theaters with the same old experience, I think that's naive and short-sighted, because I don't think a lot of people are looking forward to that, to going back to this, theater that's not necessarily clean, with people who talk and people on their phones. So you're going to have to make the experience better in some way. And I think this is the opportunity where, people like Disney and possibly even Netflix, they already own a theater in LA. So maybe they start getting in the ballgame. And Apple TV, which really has been struggling lately to kind of find its voice. Maybe this is it. Because you think about going to an Apple store and how well thought out the layout of that store is. Imagine that applied to a theater.
Yeah,
how
nice.
do you not apply that thinking to your theatrical or going to a theater in that experience? So,
well, I know AMC, they're reopening, I think this week or next week, and their opening day or opening week, I think it's just opening day, 15-cent tickets.
Yeah.
So they're really just trying to get people back into the old field. But I think you're totally right. I think that the reality of the media experience inside of a theater, or the consumption experience inside of a theater, has got to change. And some of these larger spaces that you go into, I think about the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of a Hollywood experience on top of watching a movie. And I honestly seek out a movie when I'm in Hollywood or New York to go to some of these bigger theaters. I think it'd be interesting, though, if Paramount purchased up all the Paramount theaters again. Disney through, for Fox, bought back the Fox theaters. I mean, these were
the Fox theaters in Westwood. Yeah, we used to have a lot of premieres when I was there, and it was all. And it would be interesting if they could go back to those days when Paramount owned a lot of theaters, Fox owned theaters.
Yeah.
And to your point, you're right. You're absolutely right about the LA theatrical, like going to theaters in LA. You have the Cinerama Dome. You have arc lights. You really have a lot of options. But by and by, they're all more or less the same in terms of the theatrical experience. So whether or not, these new companies, if Disney or Comcast or whoever decides to buy a theater, what they bring to the table in terms of changing the theatrical experience so it's more memorable for people, it'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I think definitely the change is happening. But also at the same time, so we have Disney kind of pushing or doubling down on this idea of going to a theater experience. So obviously sticking with some kind of idea of theatrical release.
Yep.
And then at the same time launching Milan on Disney Plus.
Yep.
And that idea of just going digital. Wasn't it interesting that Disney showed a $5 billion loss in their financials, and their stocks went up at the same time? I mean, that is like...
It just shows the kind of world we're currently living in, where up is down and left is right. And, typically if any media company would show that level of loss, the stock would plummet. But it was because Bob Chapek, the new CEO, talked a lot about the Disney Plus numbers and how great they've been over the course of the last few months, that the stock went up because Disney's more or less saying, listen, we are doubling down. We believe in streaming. And you get the cursory but we still believe in theatrical. But I don't really think anybody really believes that. I think everyone sort of is coming down to the fact that streaming is the future. The windows are shifting. You can't have the 3-month window anymore. It's just not economically possible anymore. And you see a lot of the bigger companies doing that. We can talk a little bit about what happened this week at WarnerMedia, with over 600 people being laid off, some of them in, the bigger higher ups in home entertainment and theatrical distribution.
Yeah.
And you can see that this realignment is starting to happen. And before the big set of layoffs came through, Jason Kilar, who's the new CEO of WarnerMedia, let go of Kevin Riley and Bob Greenblatt, who were basically big titans in the sort of TV world. And they were both brought in to sort of run the content out of HBO Max. And he kind of showed them the door because they were traditional linear TV folk. And the thought process now is that we need to do something different than focus on linear TV. We need to try to find people who are going to push the boundaries a little bit creatively, and also provide us with the content that's going to give sort of our platform somewhat of a brand that people can sort of associate with.
Yeah, to me, I think the breadcrumbs are obvious, right? Like the breadcrumbs we're going to follow are obvious. We're going to see this over and over and over again. Really, to some degree, we could talk about this forever and really get nowhere. But it's super obvious. The 600 people layoff at WarnerMedia is a clear indicator that these media giants have to be letting go of some of this fat, some of the old way of thinking. Yeah. The reason why I like to harp on it is as a content maker, but also as a creative consultant for companies. So many people in the content making game want to make a television show and then they name a major network.
Yeah.
But the networks are falling apart as fast as people are making shows. And to think that there's money, like to fool yourself and to think that there's going to be any money available to make a show that's not going to have to be attached to some other commercial entity when you make it. It's like the rules have changed, folks. That's all we want to say over and over and over. Hollywood is breaking and the rules are changing.
The rules are changing. I mean, if you look at some of the big deals that, with Ryan Murphy that Netflix made and spent a godly amount of money and to bring, these creators into their orbit. And it's just like there's only so much money to go around. And at a certain point, you're not going to have, you need to starting to see some returns right now. I think Netflix is living high on the fact that they've been so successful in terms of having shows that sort of penetrate the culture a little bit. And I think what's going to start happening is you're going to see that there are only so many of these big budget content creators around. Like HBO, WarnerMedia spent a fortune bringing J.J. Abrams into the fold.
Yeah.
He's one guy, and he can only really work at a certain pace. And what does that mean for the rest of HBO Max? And
do you see the deal? Scorsese signed his deal with Apple TV Plus.
Yes, exactly.
They're not going to the studios right now.
No, because the Apple TV Plus and the Netflixes and to some extent HBO Max, but not as much. They don't have as big a market cap as Apple does, obviously. So there's money to be thrown around, but at a certain point, you've got to start seeing some return on that money. And I don't think it's really there yet. And I think to your point about sort of the rules breaking down, and we touched a little bit about this last week about the layoffs at CAA, in terms of there just being more options for content, and people are going to be hungry for it because places like Disney Plus, there's only so many times Baby Yoda is going to get people to sign up for Disney Plus or Hamilton. HBO Max doesn't really have a show. They have a great library, but they don't really have any shows that have popped yet. And
HBO Max is a totally different problem. HBO has lost its branding at all with HBO Max, HBO Go, HBO Now. What a cluster that was, right?
And I think Jason Kilar, the CEO, recognized that was this past week in some of the interviews he did, recognized that was a bit of a misstep on their part, just trying to take the HBO brand. Because if you think about a show, what is a Netflix show? What is a CBS show? I mean, it's tough to, really discern what those are. But if you say HBO, people sort of get the understanding, you're talking like high-end, really well-done adult drama.
Westworld,
The Sopranos, Succession, all these big, beautifully done shows.
Yeah, that one show about dragons. What was that?
Oh, yeah, that little game of bones.
Game, all of it about games.
No, not that little show that everyone else and Jeff Bezos is spending a lot of money to recreate.
No, but to your point, like with HBO, they have such a deep roster of good entertainment, already kind of feature length or feature quality entertainment, where Netflix, I feel like, they've kind of invested on the cheaper side and getting the volume out there. Super smart move for them. I don't know what Apple TV's idea is. I honestly feel like they're spending a lot of money on high-end names with very little output. And that, it's going to crush them. There must have some kind of exit strategy here that they're basically contracts for some reason.
It's interesting because the ongoing debate about the streamers is you either come in with a library like Disney Plus, or you go after big time content, or you have like the established creators like Netflix does, or you have the franchises. For example, like HBO Max has some franchises that people want to watch over and over again. Like people will watch the end of Sopranos 50 million times to try to figure out what it means. So it's sort of like that kind of thing is sort of is sustainable in some ways. But when you look at Apple TV Plus, they don't have a library. They haven't really had a hit. I mean, Dickinson caused a bit of a stir. Defending Jacob, which I thought was really well done in a lot of ways, kind of came and went, and nobody really paid attention to it. Yeah. They had Greyhound, which was a purchase off Sony, which did okay for them. They said it was their biggest hit ever, which what does that mean? So I think
about those are like one show, and then you're done with the entire platform. There's nothing else that keeps you on the platform. Right. And what we've learned is that the off platform is such a hard thing for these content media groups to manage. I mean, if you don't stick on their platform, they're going to lose you, and then you're going to go to some other kind of binge watch on Amazon. Right. And so if you can't sustain me and moving from show to show, and it's in a way like why my Netflix subscription is worth so much. Like I can just buy one subscription and get tons of content. Apple TV subscription for a show, for one show.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's why the rumblings are sort of like, well, if and when another studio gets bought, which is obviously the never-ending conversation in Hollywood, is which one's next. Will Apple come in and buy like Sony so they can have a library? Or will Apple come in and buy Paramount so they can have a library? Or will they go find a library that they can buy on the cheap so they at least have something while they sort of ramp up their content? And, they're a bit of trying to figure out who they are, what their voice is. I mean, Tim Cook just kind of got into it because they had so much money. Yeah. And they had all the devices. They had the distribution devices. So like, well, why aren't we making content?
I just feel like it's 40 years behind its schedule. When
I mean, you look at Amazon.
Sony, isn't that obvious that Sony did something 40 years ago?
Right, right.
Come on, go find your own game.
You could go back all the way to to AOL Time Warner, the merger that was supposed to be the greatest merger of all mergers, and it turned out to be an absolute disaster because it sounded like it made sense.
Yeah.
Well, is the new internet. Time Warner produces content. Woo, it's perfect. And then it crashed and burned. And it seems to me that everyone, I think a lot of people in the tech world think that if you show up with your data and your algorithms, boom, you can just make a show that everyone's going to want to watch. And there's a lot more nuance to it than I think a lot of people give credit for. And I think that's what sort of Apple TV Plus is sort of discovering. Amazon's still trying to figure out what they are and what they do. Now, they've definitely had more hits in Jack Ryan and, those kind of show, and, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So they've had sort of the hits. They've sort of established themselves.
But they also have a film library. I mean, when I turn on my Amazon, I'm already part of Prime. I turn on, I watch, it's that one's not going anywhere.
You can still rent titles from Apple TV Plus, but, you're just being a member of Apple TV Plus doesn't really get you much of anything. I mean, I think maybe have 10 shows on the platform, if that.
Yeah. I feel like my Amazon subscription's like my basic cable subscription. There's always going to be something to watch there. It's not the premium stuff. It's not my HBO subscription, but it is take over that thing.
Yeah, typically we're trying to figure out what to watch. And in my household, it's usually we start with Amazon Prime, scroll through it, and see what everybody, because you're right. It's very apt comparison. It's like basically your cable subscription. You just put channels. Whereas at Apple TV Plus, it's really hard when you've just got an antenna, basically. We got CBS, ABC, NBC. Okay, that's it.
And you tune in for it just to watch the show.
Right, right.
The big media giants this last week, they were making a claim that their ad revenue, they're seeing the light, right? Their ad revenue is going up. They're so excited. They're trying to obviously stir up Wall Street to not give up on there too soon. But you might have some experience in this.
Maybe a little.
Ad spending went up in a political year. Imagine.
Oh, really?
Wow, what's happening here?
I'm speechless.
I mean, what a farce, right? Like, truly, there is no. I mean, after November, their ad revenue is going to drop back down and disappear.
Right. And you made reference. I do have some experience in this realm, and it very much is. Oh, look at all this money coming in, and then oops, December slows around. Uh-oh. What do we have lined up for January? Nothing. Oh, great. We have all this ad inventory we can't sell. I think you're to your point about, they don't want to scare off their advertisers. They still want the brands to feel like people are watching. So I think there's definitely sort of a survivalist instinct to the whole spin of, ad spinning up. But I think it's also a sign, again, as you pointed out earlier, that things are changing. And it's interesting that you bring that up and sort of like, in terms of the big media and them talking about making all this money from politicals and the death of probably one of the remaining few big media titans in Sumner Redstone this past week. And sort of like the end of that era in terms of, he was the guy who came up with multiplex, was credited with saying content is king and took MTV worldwide. And with his death and sort of with Rupert Murdoch sort of stepping aside and letting the next generation take over, I think you're going to see a little bit more of a shift where people are going to start to move beyond just sort of like what has sustained them in the past. And I think to your point about the political, it's interesting because, like I said, come January, they might be right back where they are before, because we might be in another outbreak somewhere in the country. And, God forbid we go into a lockdown again, but I mean, it's entirely possible. So you just never know. It's
interesting to have these deaths like Olivia de Havilland and Redstone. Their deaths almost are in sync with these major changes as well, right?
Yeah.
So the Havilland and the Paramount Decree, to have those almost in sync. And now with Redstone dying, and what we're seeing also in this idea of the multiplex, like, is unnecessary anymore. Like, the multiplex was falling apart, and he was the creator of the multiplex. But he was beyond that. He's a media giant in that he really was a guy building one of those big media empires. Viacom was an accumulation of media over many, many years, created a huge empire. And now that's falling apart. I mean, truly, a lot of what he spent in his lifetime really is the end of a lifetime. It's an end of an era that way.
Yeah, and I think you also see it's interesting with, the passing of the old, media titans. You have the new tech titans kind of moving in and sort of redefining what the space may look like in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think everyone's trying to figure out what it's going to look like, because so much has changed over the course of the last few months, and so many things that have been talked about in the industry for the last 5 to 10 years over the course of the last 5 months have all of a sudden come to fruition.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see with, as you pointed out, with the ending of the Paramount Decree, the passing of Olivia de Havilland, who sort of like was key in breaking the old studio system, and sort of Sumner Redstone with the idea of buying up pieces and building a massive media empire. And now all those pieces are starting to sort of collapse a little bit and starting to show their age. And you've got these tech titans coming in, sort of reinventing the wheel and, producing content at an unbelievable clip that you didn't think was possible, because you thought, with production, we need a 3-month lead time and then you go into, previs, and then you go into production, then you have post, and then you have the marketing campaign. And Netflix has sort of compressed all that into like a month.
Yeah. I almost have like the back of my, thoughts really are this idea that creativity is losing in a lot of things. Like, we're really are developing content at such a different pace, at such a higher scale. There's a blessing to having some of these monopolies and gatekeepers out of the way so that good content could show up. But in reality, the value of content is totally being pushed away. It's becoming such a commodity, and commodity at a different pace. And maybe that's what Apple TV is trying to do with their stuff, is actually really retain some of the value proposition of media instead of just the commoditization of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think,
content maker, we're up against something very, very different nowadays. We're fighting for pace or speed, cost, and no one's really asking, like, but is it good?
Yeah. Well, it's you bring that up, and it just sparks something in my mind that Apple is very much about sort of the quality, and that sort of defines their brand in a lot of ways. I mean, I'll probably get some pushback from this, because you have your Apple purists who say that over the course of the last 5 years, as Apple's become more prevalent, before it was just the computers that creatives used, be it art directors, editors, filmmakers. Now pretty much everybody has an Apple. So they would say that the quality has gone down, but I would say that most of your average consumer looks at Apple as a high quality product. So maybe the argument could be made that that's what Apple's doing. They're looking for high quality product. Like the first movie they bought was with Tom Hanks, who can arguably be said is one of our best movie stars. Now they've signed a deal with
Scorsese,
Scorsese, who's arguably one of our best filmmakers. And they have a deal with Richard Plepler, who was the head of HBO and brought in sort of defining HBO dramas like The Sopranos, like Westworld. So maybe that's their strategy. Maybe they're like, we're quality. We don't need to rush. We'll take time. And when we have a good piece of content, we'll put it out. Now, Netflix is sort of the polar opposite of that in a lot of ways because they just push stuff out.
They just push it.
Some of the stuff on Netflix is awful.
Yeah.
And, but they're just so desperate for content because so many of these streamers are buying back their content that they need that original to sort of fill the pipeline.
Yeah, Netflix has
I never really thought of that.
They make horrible content with. Like they get Oscar award-winning stars. I saw something. Well, I'm not going to say which one it is, but this woman won an Oscar, and then I watched a series that they were producing on Netflix, and I couldn't get through an hour of it. It was horrible, and it just was. I feel like the director was some amateur, just somebody that got out of USC film school. Gave him an Oscar winning actress, and they made a series out of it off of some loose idea of historical character. Let's wrap this up with this idea. I actually had a person I've consulted over the years come visit me, and one of her shows seems to be getting some traction and picking up. She's in that media space where she's doing a home makeover show, and content, or I would say like the brands can easily attach themselves to her show. Because when you're doing something like a home makeover, there are a lot of sponsorship opportunities. And that's what's actually gaining a lot of traction for her and her show on the cable, in the cable access world. With all the changes that you are kind of seeing here with these big changes, what would your encouragement be for other content makers? And I know that you've had conversations even the last couple of days with some of the larger agencies. So you can kind of read the tea leaves a little bit, but what's the play if I'm a content maker and you get all this change happening and I was going to make a show and pitch a show, at NAPI in January. What should I be putting together?
Well, I think a lot of, to your point, I think looking for ways to engage with other brands is definitely a way to do it, to think about how, and I'm not just saying like brand placement, but how a brand can help you tell your story. I think it's definitely one way to look at it. I also think because there's just, with all these basically streamers and the studios and everyone's competing for content, there really is just an opportunity for real original storytelling. And I think that's definitely something to look forward to. And I think for any content creator out there, there's just going to be a need for content. I mean, there's going to be a lot of the traditional model that's still going to be in place, but we talked a little bit about this last week with CAA and their layoffs and sort of the end of the dominant mega agent world. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be looking for content, and it's not necessarily you not necessarily need the agent to shop your property anymore. Yeah, and I have a feeling
really some of the need for agents or the legal side of it, and very important move for people, is to kind of lock in some IP so that if you have the ability or a platform to tell a story, you have some kind of intellectual property that you can leverage into that conversation, because that's what's going to make your piece of content different than
I mean, the reality is there's going to be a lot more opportunity, but you're still going to be dealing with a lot of the same gatekeepers who are going to be overly cautious and not going to want to spend a lot of money. But if you come with some sort of IP that you can at least show has some semblance of a built-in audience, and that may come back to sort of the idea of working with brands, because brands come with a built-in audience, and they have sort of a visibility, so that could also help in a lot of ways. I think it's just it's a very interesting time, and we don't know where the tide is going to go at this point, but I think the changes that we're seeing seems to be a refrain of what we're talking about here are important in terms of sort of really giving original storytellers the leg up that they may not have had a year ago or even 6 months ago.
Well, I'll say this. I love the challenge, and I'm thankful that you're on the journey with me in this challenge. It's fun thinking of the show ideas that we have and doing some of the pitches that we're doing. We'll say that we're hitting the same roadblocks other people are hitting along the way and kind of learning and navigating through this terrain. But what an interesting time to be alive, what an interesting time to be making content. And we know there will be winners on the other side of this transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to be on the winning team as people are pushing through, which is why we love to share on these mornings during Hollywood breaks.
Absolutely.
All right. Keith, thank you again for your time in this.
Always good to talk to you.
I'm truly loving this. I think I'm becoming more of a media geek than I ever have before. So
it's very easy to get sucked in, especially with all the changes that are happening pretty much daily in the industry.
Yeah. And I have no one to talk to about this. So to get you on the line at least once a week and have this conversation.
That's what I'm here for.
But we'd love to, anybody watch this, we'd love to hear from you as well. Again, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We'd love to have you involved. There are some people that are also watching this live, and we thank you for tuning into us on Friday mornings. Some of you are in different time zones, so we know that you're waking up a little bit earlier than the rest of us. And it's good to have you here. We are going to be here next week. We're going to keep this thing going until we get bored, which probably be never. So we'll come back next week on Friday morning. If you want to hear more about this, join us live. Send us an email, tim@revthink.com, and I'll make sure you're on our small mailing list of people that are joining us. Until next week, Keith, you have a great weekend. Enjoy your time in Maine and safe travels back home.
Yeah, I'll be back. When we broadcast next Friday, I'll be back in my abode in Philadelphia. So this will be my last time up here in Maine, unfortunately, but back to reality.
We'll have to find you an iconic Philly backdrop for the show.
That's a good idea. Maybe I should do like maybe the art house, the art museum steps, which everyone obviously knows from Rocky.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. We could be maybe like we get you filming up the stairs at the very beginning of the show.
Yeah, I don't know if that's gonna happen. I haven't been in the gym in a while. I don't know if I want to.
Yeah, I don't know.
Going halfway up the stairs.
Halfway and breathing.
I won't be able to talk for like 30 minutes.
All right. Thank you. I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Tim. Talk to you next week.